Hello, good morning. Today I'm going to talk about Aristotle's ethics in this video. Before I start, I would like to give you an overview of the different ethical theories that are out there. So broadly speaking, ethical theories, ethics can be divided into two kinds of ethical theories. There is rule-based ethics and there is character or virtue-based ethics. Now, rule-based ethics, as the name suggests, are ethical systems that focus on rules upon telling you what is the right thing to do. Whereas character-based ethics are ethical systems that focus on not so much on telling you what is the right thing to do, but on telling you what kind of person you should become or what kind of qualities or virtues you should cultivate in order to be a good person and to live a good life. Now, you might remember that at the beginning of the semester, we actually spent some time talking about rule-based ethics, which is the divine command theory. You might remember that the divine command theory sets forth as the basic rule that in order to do the right thing, you have to do what God commands you. So divine command theory is an example of rule-based ethics. Aristotelian ethics, Aristotle's ethics, which is what we're going to talk about today, is an example of a character or virtue-based ethics. Because as you will see, Aristotle is concerned about how to live a good life or how to live a life of happiness and flourishing. And he believes that in order to do that, we will be in the best position to do that if we live a life of rationality, if we live a life that is devoted to the virtues, and by cultivating the virtues, we'll be in the best position overall to live a life of happiness and flourishing. So with this in mind, let's just go right into Aristotle. So let me begin by talking about a few basic concepts in Aristotle's ethics. There are three basic concepts that we need to be familiar with, and first is the concept of happiness, or eudaimonia in Greek. The second is the concept of reason or rationality or logos in Greek, and the third is the concept of virtue or excellence or arete in Greek. So these three concepts are actually very intimately connected. So let me start by happiness. So happiness or eudaimonia is sometimes also translated as flourishing. Now, in our textbook, it is being translated as happiness, but I think that sometimes happiness may be a little bit misleading, because what Aristotle means by eudaimonia isn't just this state of feeling good about yourself. I mean, you can feel good about yourself after you have had a chocolate bar or some ice cream, but that's not the kind of happiness that he's talking about. When he talks about eudaimonia, he has in mind some notion of flourishing, and to flourish isn't the same as simply being happy, because to flourish is to live well among other human beings in a human community. And so when you read the textbook, when you think about happiness in Aristotle's terms, I think it is useful to remind yourself that happiness isn't just a subjective feeling for Aristotle, but happiness is a constant state of living well among other human beings in a human community. So, so what do we need to do in order to live well among other human beings in a human community? According to Aristotle, we must live. In order to do that, we have to live according to reason or rationality. And it's not just living according to reason, but we have to live according to reason in a way that contributes to the excellence of ourselves and also to all the other members of society. So, which brings in the third concept, which is the concept of virtue or excellence. So, the Greek word for this is arete. We usually translate it as virtue. Some people also translate it as excellence. And so what Aristotle means is that by the word arete or excellence is that living well among other human beings is like an art form or like a sport almost. Just as you need to practice baseball to be a good baseball player, similarly, it is only by practicing how to live well among other people that you become better at living well among other people. It is only by practicing how to be virtuous that you become better at being virtuous. And once you become better at becoming virtuous, then becoming virtuous becomes a pleasant experience, a pleasant thing for you to do, and it becomes in a sense easier to be virtuous and easier to live in a state of rationality among other human beings. So these three concepts, as you can see, are very intimately and organically connected. You can't really have one without practicing the other two. And the key word is practicing or practice, because Aristotle isn't just concerned with understanding virtue or understanding happiness in some kind of theoretical textbook kind of fashion. In order for his ethics to work, one has to practice being virtuous. So most of the Nicomachean ethics, which is what you are reading in the textbook, is actually devoted to proving that this notion of happiness is what is best for in order for a human being to live well. It is also devoted to showing how it is that we human beings can live according to virtue, and what virtue is, and how to cultivate those virtues. So in what follows, I'm going to say a little bit more about happiness and virtue, and the relation between the two. Okay, so let's move on to happiness. So in your textbook, or which reproduces book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, in book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle spends a lot of time trying to tell us what is happiness. So he offers us two ways of showing us what happiness is. The first way is that he declares that happiness is that which is self-sufficient, and the second way is that happiness is that which is defined by man's function. Okay, let me talk about each of them in turn. So let's talk about the first one first. So Aristotle declares that happiness is that which is self-sufficient. There are two ways. There are two ways to understand what is meant by self-sufficient. First, when we say that something is self-sufficient, we are saying that something is that which we desire only for its own sake. So, for example, let's take something that many of us want: money. Is money happiness? Well, not really, because we don't actually desire money for its own sake. We want money because we can buy things with money, because we can do things with money. If you are stuck on a desert island with nothing to buy, then having a lot of money wouldn't be of any use. So money cannot be happiness, because money is not something which we desire for its own sake. How about pleasure? Pleasure is a little bit more complicated, because we do actually desire pleasure for its own sake. We want to feel good, for the sake of feeling good. But pleasure isn't something which we desire only for its own sake, and the key word here is only. Because we do desire pleasure because we believe that generally having more pleasure would lead to a more happy life than not. So pleasure is something that you desire both for its own sake and also for the sake of something else. So according to Aristotle, there's only one thing that we desire for its own sake, and that is happiness. So happiness is happiness is self-sufficient because it is something which we desire only for its own sake. Okay, and then there is the idea that happiness is that which is not dependent on externals. So again, money is not happiness because money is dependent on externals. You may make more or less money. If there is a recession and there is runaway inflation, your money might become worthless. So money is totally dependent on externals. The approval of your friends or worldly honors is also dependent on externals. Because if your friends cease to like you, then you will lose the approval of your friends. So therefore, money and the approval of your friends are not happiness. So what that means is that only happiness can be happiness. Now, you might be feeling a little bit unsatisfied right now, because even if we know that happiness is something which is not dependent on externals, even if we know that happiness is something which we desire only for its own sake, you might realize that he still hasn't told us what happiness is. He has told us what it is characterized by and what it is not, but we still don't know what exactly it is. So, but do not worry. This is why we have the second argument. So the second argument is that Aristotle tries to show us. He tries to show us that happiness is something which is defined by man's function. Um, so the idea is that if you want to know what will make you happy as a man or woman, as a human being, you need to know what is the function that is unique to yourself as a human being. You need to know what sets you apart from non-human animals and from plants. So let's start with plants. Plants, the function of plants is nutrition and growth. Plants taking nutrients from the sun and from the environment, and they grow. Humans grow as well. So what that means is that since nutrition and growth is not unique to human beings, therefore nutrition and growth cannot be our function. Our function in life, our purpose in life cannot be simply to take in nutrition and grow. Okay, we cannot see, our function in life cannot be simply to become stronger or become bigger. Perception. Well, somebody might say, well, how about perception? Maybe the purpose of life is to take in as many beautiful things, perceive as many beautiful things as possible. But Aristotle would say, look, this is not unique to human beings. Animals are also capable of perceiving things. Animals are also capable of being moved by beautiful sights and sounds. So therefore, perception or the taking in of beautiful sights and sounds cannot be what is unique to human beings. So the only thing that is unique to human beings, according to Aristotle, is rational activity. And more specifically, it is rational activity in accordance with virtue. It is rational activity that allows you to live happily and in a flourishing manner among your fellow human beings in a human community. This is something that only humans can do. So therefore, rational activity in accordance with virtue is what is unique to human beings, which means that therefore rational activity in accordance with human beings is what constitutes happiness for human beings. So now we know. Now we know better. Now we know that happiness for Aristotle consists in rational activity in accordance with virtue. So the next question is, what is virtue? How do we go about cultivating it? Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So again, I'm repeating myself. Aristotle says that rational activity for human beings is virtue. Now, there are a couple of things that we need to know about virtue. First, virtue is something that is neither according to our nature nor against our nature, but is something that has to be acquired by disposition, but is an acquired disposition that has to be cultivated by training and by habit. So, we are not virtuous by nature. A man in the state of in the wild is not virtuous. He is a savage. However, we have the capacity to cultivate ourselves to become virtuous through education and through training. And so virtue is something, if you want to be virtuous and happy, you need to cultivate virtue through a process of continual habituation, ethos, and training. So how do you go about training yourself to become virtuous? Now Aristotle provides us with a clue here. He says that virtue is a mean between extremes of emotion. So virtue is to be virtuous is to train yourself to not react too much in one direction or another when you are in a difficult situation. Now let's take one example. Let's take the example of courage. So in order to be courageous, you must be able to not have too much fear or too little fear in a dangerous situation. Because if you suppose you are a soldier, if you have too much fear, then you will be cowardly. You will be cowardly and run away from the enemy. But if you have too little fear, then you will be foolhardy and rash and endanger yourself and your friends. So using this as one example, you can see that all the virtues, whether it's justice or courage or moderation, consist in being able to control your emotions. And being able to control your emotions so that you display and feel just the right amount of emotion is something that comes only through continual training and habituation. So according to Aristotle, ideally, the virtuous person should be somebody who is able to to act virtuously in any situation, and is able to do it so in such a natural way, in a way that is so natural to himself that he actually finds being virtuous to be a pleasant experience. So when he is courageous, he will be courageous and take pleasure in being courageous. When he is being moderate in his pleasures, he will take he will take pleasure in exercising moderation. So for him, it wouldn't be a struggle to always have to resist the temptation to eat more or drink more. For him, he will find pleasure in almost naturally choosing to eat more, to eat moderately and drink moderately. He will find pleasure in reacting courageously with just the right amount of fear to any dangerous or difficult situation. So to be virtuous is to engage in virtuous actions with pleasure, and that is what we should strive to be in order to be virtuous and happy, according to Aristotle. So I'm going to talk about this more next week, but what Aristotle would say is that ultimately there are 5 kinds of people in the world. So there is the virtuous person, who is somebody who takes pleasure in naturally being virtuous because he has been trained and habituated to do so. And then there is the continent or strong-willed person. Now the strong-willed person, he knows what the virtuous thing to do is in all situations, but he's not as virtuous as the virtuous person, because he actually has to always exercise his strong will, his willpower, in order to overcome temptation. And then there is also the incontinent or the weak-willed person, number 3 here. The incontinent or weak-willed person is somebody who who also knows what the virtuous thing is to do, but he has a weaker willpower than the strong-willed person. So although he knows what the right thing to do is, he usually ends up succumbing to temptation anyway because of his weak will. Now we are going to talk more about weak-willed people next week, but so this is something to keep in mind for now. And then fourth on the list, there is the person of vice. Now the person of vice is totally misguided about what is virtue and what is the right thing to do. The person of vice often believes that the wrong thing to do is the right thing to do. So for example, the person of vice would believe that eating a lot, drinking too much, maybe having too much sex is the right thing to do, when in fact it is actually the non-virtuous or the vicious thing to do. So and then next down the line, lastly, there is the person of bestiality. Now the person of bestiality is somebody who because of some kind of psychological condition is incapable of being educated and being trained to become virtuous. So in Aristotle's time, he believed that there are certain barbarians, non-great peoples, who are psychologically unsound and who simply cannot be trained to become virtuous. Those people can be defeated and subjugated in battle. Maybe you can make them into slaves, but you can never train them to become virtuous because they are psychologically unsound. In this day and age, we don't believe that anymore, thankfully. But I think it still applies today, because we can also think of certain people who suffer from certain serious psychological disabilities or certain serious mental conditions as being people of bestiality, in a sense, because of their psychological disability, because of their mental disability, they are unable to be educated to become virtuous. So this idea of the person of bestiality actually still applies today. Okay, so this is all for now. I think I've covered the basics of Aristotle's virtue ethics. So next week I will talk about the weak will, being weak will, which is also covered in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, book 7. So take some time to think about all this, and read what is in the textbook. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or come see me directly. Thank you very much.